Okay, let's dive in. Think about this. Back in 2019, the turnover of just the top 4 commodity traders, it was actually more than everything Japan exported that whole year.
That's an incredible statistic. Really puts their scale into perspective, doesn't it? More than a whole industrial giant like Japan.
Exactly. And, what are they trading? It's the really fundamental stuff. The fuel in our cars, metals for our phones, the food we eat.
The absolute building blocks of the modern world.
Mhm.
And yet, the companies doing this trading, they often operate, well, pretty much out of sight.
Right. And that's what we're getting into today. We've got some fascinating material here, really digging into the history, the influence of commodity trading.
And it's not just dry economics, is it? It's based on interviews, documents, stories collected over decades from all over the world. Gives a unique view.
Totally. So, look, you might not think about commodity trading much, but it impacts, well, pretty much everything. Geopolitics, the price of your coffee, it's all connected.
Absolutely. Understanding this world is key to really grasping how the global economy and even international relations actually function day to day.
So, our mission, if you like, is to pull back the curtain a bit, understand the role these traders play, find some of those aha moments, because they often prefer to stay, let's say, discreet.
Discreet is a good word.
Mm.
So how did this whole industry become so central, so powerful, often without grabbing the headlines?
Well, the sources point to a few key figures early on, sort of the founding fathers, you could say.
Right.
You've got Theodore Weiser in oil, Ludwig Jesselson in metals, and John H. McMillan Jr. from Cargill, big in agriculture.
And what was special about them?
They had this vision, apparently, way before anyone talked about globalization. They saw the world as one single market.
That's quite forward-thinking for the time, seeing those connections early on.
Definitely. And they weren't afraid to push boundaries. Take Weiser. This is fascinating. During the Cold War, he starts doing deals to buy oil from the communist bloc.
Wow, okay. That must have ruffled some feathers.
Oh, yeah. Big time. The Seven Sisters, the huge Western oil companies, they were not happy. They pushed back, tried to shut him down.
But he persisted.
He did. And ultimately, his deals actually helped increase Soviet oil exports onto the world market. It showed that these independent traders could really shake things up.
A sign of things to come, perhaps. Challenging the established order.
And Jesselson was doing similar things, but with metals. Trading with the communist world, finding early success in places like Yugoslavia.
Breaking down barriers, essentially. Looking for supply wherever it could be found.
Then there's McMillan at Cargill. He used TradeAx International, based in Geneva, to massively expand Cargill's global reach.
Ah, Switzerland. That connection starts early then.
It really does. The sources mentioned the appeal, excellent travel and communication, plus, crucially, limited corporate taxes. Switzerland became this hub.
So these pioneers weren't just traders, they were building international networks, capitalizing on favorable locations.
And getting seriously wealthy and influential in the process. They became, as one source puts it, paragons of the new economic order. Getting invited into presidential palaces, seen as key players.
It's kind of a quiet revolution, though, isn't it? This massive industry growing, becoming central to the economy, but largely unnoticed by the public.
Until the 1970s, yeah. It flew under the radar for a long time. But those early moves, like Weiser's Soviet deals, they had consequences. They started to weaken the grip of the Seven Sisters.
How so?
Well, partly by bringing more oil onto the market, often at competitive prices. This erosion of their control set the stage for something huge. Remember August 1960?
Refresh my memory.
Standard Oil of New Jersey, one of the biggest sisters, they just unilaterally cut the price they paid for Middle Eastern crude oil. Didn't even consult the producing countries.
Oof, I can imagine how that went down.
Badly. The oil-producing nations were furious. They felt ignored, their revenues slashed.
And their response?
Was OPEC, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, formed directly because of that resentment. It fundamentally changed the game in the oil world.
Right, a major shift in power. And into this changing landscape steps Mark Rich.
Exactly. He was working at Philip Brothers, a big trading house then, and he was super ambitious. He wanted to trade oil completely outside the control of the Seven Sisters.
So carving out his own path.
Yeah. He even used the Eilat-Ashkelon pipeline, apparently, as an early advantage. But the real catalyst, the thing that turbocharged the traders' rise, was the 1973 Yom Kippur War.
And the oil crisis that followed.
Precisely. Oil prices went through the roof. Suddenly, the power wasn't with the big oil companies anymore, it was shifting. And for traders like Philip Brothers, this created unbelievable profit opportunities.
Because they could navigate the chaos, connect buyers and sellers when the old system broke down.
You got it. And they didn't just stick to oil. Philip Brothers expanded fast into grains, coffee, sugar. Other big players, the agricultural giants who'd made money earlier, they moved into metals and oil too.
So you start seeing the emergence of these multi-commodity giants, trading everything.
Exactly. And as oil became so critical, governments realized they needed these traders to secure supplies. That gave the traders huge political access, huge influence.
It's quite a leap from just moving goods to having that kind of political clout.
It is. And their willingness to operate in really difficult, politically charged situations is striking. Take Libya during the Arab Spring in 2011.
Right, the uprising against Gaddafi.
Well, Ian Taylor and Vittal, another major trader, they actually started supplying fuel to the rebels. Think about that risk. No stable government, no guarantee of getting paid.
That's incredibly risky. What was the impact?
It seems it was significant. The sources note that key oil towns fell under rebel control after Vittal started delivering fuel. It shows how traders could directly influence events on the ground.
And Taylor himself faced a dilemma, didn't he? Keep supplying without payment.
Yeah. Apparently, his decision to continue was based on long-term relationships, particularly with Qatar, who were backing the rebels. It shows how these networks operate.
Then you have the contrast with someone like Mark Rich again. His approach seemed almost amoral.
Well, the sources quote his principle as money, not politics. He traded with Pinochet's right-wing regime in Chile and Ortega's left-wing Sandinistas in Nicaragua. Ideology didn't seem to matter.
Just the deal itself.
Pretty much. And speaking of tricky politics, apartheid South Africa is a major example. International sanctions were in place, but traders kept the oil flowing.
How did they manage that? It was a global embargo, wasn't it?
They were incredibly resourceful or deceptive, depending on your view, sourcing oil from places like Iran, the Soviet Union, Saudi Arabia, even Brunei, countries that officially banned sales to South Africa.
Wow. The logistics must have been complex.
And secretive. There's this amazing anecdote about a tanker captain chartered by Mark Rich's company. He gets a telex telling him to hide the ship's name. His reply. He says he won't repaint it, but maybe he'll cover it with canvas if the weather's okay.
Huh. It sounds like something out of a spy novel. Masters of disguise and deception indeed.
And they used elaborate schemes, like the Kobuko setup. Mark Rich plus Co. basically pretended to be officials from Burundi, one of the poorest countries in the world, then to get access to oil deals and financing.
Using Burundi as a front.
Yeah, a small, landlocked African nation becoming the face for one of the world's richest traders to circumvent sanctions. It's pretty wild when you think about it.
Absolutely wild. So, moving forward a bit, into the late 80s, early 90s, things changed again with financial innovation, right? Futures and options.
Yeah, that was another massive shift, especially in energy trading. These tools allowed traders to hedge, to lock in prices for the future.
Reduced risk in some ways.
It did reduce price risk, which allowed for bigger deals.
Yeah.
But it also opened the door for way more speculation. It changed how oil prices were set, how risk was managed.
And some traders really thrived on that.
Oh, yeah. Andy Hall is mentioned as someone who really knew how to use these new instruments. He apparently made a killing a blowout trade during the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in 1990 by anticipating market moves.
Interesting. And while oil trading was booming with these new tools, what happened to the older businesses like metals at Philip Brothers?
That side declined, actually. So much so that eventually Mark Rich plus Co. ended up buying what was left of Philip Brothers' metals contracts.
A changing of the guard, in a way. But these new financial markets weren't without danger, were they?
Definitely not. There's the story of John Dose. He tried to corner the entire Brent crude oil market, basically buy up so much supply he could dictate the price.
Ambitious. Did it work?
Nope. It failed spectacularly. He lost a massive amount of money, a real cautionary tale about the risks involved.
Okay, so then the really big geopolitical shift happens. The collapse of the Soviet Union.
Right, early 90s. And that created, well, chaos, but also immense opportunity for traders who were willing to dive in.
A volatile environment, but potentially very profitable.
Hugely. Look at Transworld, run by the Rubin brothers and Lev Chernoy. They basically came to dominate the Russian aluminum industry.
How? Did they buy the smelters?
Not necessarily owning them outright initially. They used tolling deals a lot. That's where you provide the raw materials, pay a fee for processing, and then you own and sell the finished metal. It let them control massive amounts of aluminum without huge upfront investment in the mines or smelters themselves, plus strategic acquisitions later.
Clever. Exploiting the disruption. But it was a tough time for ordinary people there.
Extremely tough, widespread hardship. But the traders thrived in that uncertainty.
And it wasn't just Russia, right? Other former Soviet bloc countries opened up too.
Yeah. Vital and Trafigura got heavily involved in Cuba, for instance, after Soviet support dried up. That was tricky. Payment was linked to volatile sugar and oil prices. Vital even ended up running hotels there to try and get their money back.
Hotels, that's diversification.
Whatever it took, I guess. And then you have Glencore financing the government in Tajikistan during its civil war. Talk about high-risk environments.
It really underscores their appetite for risk, their ability to operate almost anywhere.
Then comes the next huge wave, probably the biggest one yet, the China boom, starting around 2001.
Ah, yes, China joining the WTO, the explosive growth.
It was an extraordinary expansion for the commodity traders. China's hunger for resources, copper, oil, iron ore, soybeans, everything just went vertical.
The scale was unprecedented, wasn't it?
Totally. China went from being an exporter of many things to the world's biggest importer. Copper consumption like 20 times Italy's, oil imports soaring to match Saudi Arabia's entire production. Just massive numbers.
And the traders were perfectly positioned to facilitate that.
Absolutely. This is when guys like Ivan Glasenberg at Glencore really hit the big time. Glencore made huge bets on coal and other commodities China needed, and Glasenberg became a billionaire when they eventually went public.
Others benefited too. Noble Group, Li Ka-shing.
Yeah, there were also major players riding that China wave after 2001. But this boom period, with all the money flowing, also brought more scrutiny, didn't it? Some questionable practices came to light.
Like the Iraq oil for food program under Saddam Hussein.
Exactly. The UN investigated and found this whole system of illegal surcharges, kickbacks, and traders like Glencore, Trafigura, Vital were allegedly involved. There were specific connections mentioned, like individuals named Lakhani and a company called Income linked to Glencore.
But were there consequences? Prosecutions?
That's the thing. Despite the UN findings, apparently no prosecutions followed. It highlights how difficult it can be to hold these global companies accountable.
And the soaring prices during the boom just amplified profits anyway, right? Through things like long-term contracts.
Yeah, and something called optionality in contracts. Basically, having the right but not the obligation to buy or sell at a set price. In a rising market, those options became incredibly valuable.
Gave them flexibility to really maximize returns.
During this time, we also saw new players rise fast. Mercuria and Gunvor became huge in oil trading.
How did they grow so quickly?
A key factor was the collapse of Yukos, the big Russian oil company. As the Russian state took control, they needed traders to keep the oil flowing, and Mercuria and Gunvor stepped into that role.
Which also brought some controversy, didn't it? Particularly around Gunvor and Timchenko's alleged closeness to Putin.
Yes, those connections attracted a lot of attention and speculation.
And what about Africa during this boom? Traders were heavily involved there too.
Very much so. It was a mixed picture. On one hand, investment, trade facilitation. On the other hand, accusations of propping up unpopular leaders. Glencore's activities in the Congo, dealing with Dan Gertler, who later faced U.S. sanctions, is a prime example.
And the resources there were incredibly rich.
Unbelievably rich. The ore grades at mines like Mutanda in Congo were exceptionally high, making them hugely profitable.
But there were downsides, serious ones. The Probo Koala incident.
Ah, yes, Trafigura. That was terrible. Toxic waste dumped in Abidjan, Ivory Coast, caused deaths and widespread illness. A real disaster showing the potential environmental and human cost.
A stark reminder of the responsibilities involved. Now, this whole supercycle eventually led to problems elsewhere, didn't it? The food crisis.
Yeah, 2008 and again in 2010. Prices for staple foods, soybeans, wheat, rice just shot up dramatically.
Which hit the world's poorest people the hardest.
Absolutely devastating for many. And during this time, some traders, like Cargill, reportedly made significant profits from speculative trading in food commodities.
Profiting from volatility while people struggled to afford food? That doesn't look good.
No. And Glencore faced criticism, too, during the Russian drought and wheat export ban in 2010. There were suggestions they might have profited by anticipating the ban.
So inevitably, this led to a backlash. Politicians, the public, pointing fingers.
Yeah, the term speculators got thrown around a lot. Calls for much tighter regulation of the commodity markets grew louder.
It wasn't just the financial traders, though. The big agricultural companies also have political influence around that.
Oh, for sure. Look at ADM Archer Daniels Midland. Our sources detail decades of lobbying, particularly for the U.S. ethanol industry.
Ethanol mandates, subsidies.
Exactly. And figures like Dwayne Andreas at ADM had deep connections going back to Nixon, Dole, major political players. This lobbying directly impacts global food supplies by diverting crops like corn into fuel.
Demonstrates real, long-term political power shaping markets.
Fast forward to 2011, Glencore goes public with its IPO.
That must have been a huge moment, lifting the veil somewhat.
What? It really was. Described as a crystallization of the riches of the commodity boom, it revealed the sheer scale of the wealth created for the partners. Billions upon billions.
But was it also a sign that the peak might be passing? That the environment was changing?
I think so. Increased transparency, information traveling faster, producers getting bigger and more consolidated. It all started making that traditional trading model, finding those hidden arbitrage opportunities, a bit tougher.
So how are they adapting? Are they changing their strategies?
They are. We see them investing more in physical assets, infrastructure pipelines, storage tanks, ports, like in the U.S., shale oil boom.
Getting more involved in logistics, owning the supply chain.
Exactly. And they're also playing a bigger role in financing deals, especially in riskier frontier markets. Glencore in Iraqi Kurdistan and Chad, Vital putting deals together in Kazakhstan, sometimes even using pension fund money, apparently.
Stepping into the role of financiers as well as traders. But what about the old problems? Bribery, corruption.
That's getting more attention, too. Historically, it was often seen as just the cost of doing business in some places. But scrutiny is increasing. There have been significant fines, like the one Gunvor paid, and big ongoing investigations into companies like Glencore.
So maybe a shift towards cleaner operations. Or at least more pressure to be clean.
It seems that way. The landscape is definitely evolving. There's a new generation taking over leadership at many of these firms. There's more talk about reputation, sustainability.
Oh, fundamentally.
Fundamentally, as long as the world needs to trade vast amounts of oil, metals, food across borders, these companies, the commodity traders, are likely to remain incredibly powerful forces.
So wrapping this up, the big takeaway really is, these traders aren't just middlemen. They are shaping our world in profound ways, often unseen.
Yeah, powerful forces operating globally, influencing economies, geopolitics.
And the scale is just staggering, isn't it? That comparison to Japan's exports really sticks. Plus, their ability to operate in and sometimes influence major international crises.
Yeah.
And the personal fortunes made.
Wow. It really makes you think, doesn't it, about how dependent we are on these flows of resources, the ethics involved in global supply chains, what the future holds for energy. Lots to ponder.
Which leads us to a final thought, perhaps. Looking ahead, we're facing huge challenges: climate change, resource scarcity.
Right. Big global issues.
So the question is, will the immense power, the financial muscle, the logistical expertise of these commodity traders, will it be harnessed as a force for positive change, helping us transition? Or will it mostly serve to keep the old systems, the old ways of extracting and consuming going?
That's a really crucial question for the future, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where will that power be directed? Something to keep thinking about.